All right. Well, I have, let's see, I've got two more. I don't know if we have time. Let's see. Rachel's asking, when did you first start noticing God's hidden messages in sporting events and world events?
Well, that's a good question. I basically started noticing that he was speaking in almost everything. And by that, I mean, I've told about him before, license tags and getting scriptures and getting numbers and waking up at the same time. You wake up at the same time at 5:22, 3 mornings in a row, and you're like, wait a minute, something's here. And so there's something right-brained and prophetic about recognizing patterns and numbers that he's got a light flashing. Moses was there, Exodus chapter 3. It wasn't that Lord and knocked on Moses' head and said, hey, I got a message to you. He saw a burning bush, and that honestly might not have been that rare because it's very hot desert, and sometimes they were fires, but it would not be consumed. And so it says, when Moses turned aside to see why the bush was not consumed, even though it stayed on fire, he says, then the Lord spoke to him. That, right, if you can remember that picture, is so key towards even what we're talking about. Once he knows you're paying attention, he will I'm speaking over here. I have a message here. And it's really part of my own personal joy with the Lord, because it was me overcoming years of elders in a cult-like move saying God hates sports and hates competition and hates all that. And then me having really a little bit of a third heaven encounter where we were kicking soccer ball together, and it was just blowing me away. And I was like, you like soccer? Yes. And I'm like, I can't even fathom that. So it's my own personal joy with him to go down these things and look at especially important games. And if he knows, I'm like, okay, this is a big game, God. What do you like, Super Bowl? What are you going to say? And maybe if I picked any game I picked to, okay, I'm looking for something, he'll speak there as well. But it's, I've told this, and I'll tell it because we can do it real quick. Just like Elizabeth and I are driving in a car, and I'm driving in Atlanta some years ago, and she answers the phone, but she doesn't say, oh, hi, and tell her, and she just like, oh, hi. And she listens a long time, and I can't hear the phone, and I can't hear who's talking. I look over her like, inquisitive, who is that? And she's like, not going to tell me,
Yeah.
And so I asked the Lord, and I say, Lord, who is that talking to her? And you may say, well, why are you asking that? That's not an important question. That's part of my wiring with him. I want to interact on those type of things. And so right then a car pulls in front, and the license tag had on it Robin, and it was a Florida tag, and we were in Georgia. And I went, because we had just a week before been talking with this person named Robin who lives in Florida. And so I get a smile, and then she hangs, and she's not going to let me know the name. So she hangs up, never mentioning a name. And I look, and I say, oh, so that was Robin from Florida. She goes, how did you know? I was like, I'm prophetic. And so I'm prophetic, but it's about paying attention to things like that. And then at some point, again, I realized that big games, in big horse races.
Well, it's such a mind blower, because not only did you recognize it because you were ready to recognize it and ask him, God, knowing you would ask that question, prepared that car maybe an hour or two before to be at this spot at this time to pull ahead of you, right? There's so many things involved that how does God do that, right?
Well, how God does that, what you're just bringing up, Steve, I've had at least 50 of those. And I mean, like profound ones, like Elizabeth and I are driving in North Carolina, going to a conference, and we're telling the things God has just given us prophetic words, what he wants to do with our lives, things he's doing now. And you're like, you really think that can happen? And I literally say, do you really think that can happen? And a car pulls in front, and the tag, and it had ITCNHPPN. It can happen. I don't even. Who would ever think of putting that on their tag? But the tag had it can, and we look at each other. We go, wow, how does he do that? And over and over, and it's a joy to discover that. And so the sports is just an extension and expansion of the same thing. He's everywhere, but that you're supposed to be in awe of him. I think that's what you just said. It's supposed to be the bigger takeaway.
Yeah, it is a
like,
bigger.
How did he do that?
Yeah, my wake up call in that was 7-8 years ago. At church. I told us before. I'll tell a super short version of it. A guy gives me a word, and he's praying over me in the congregation during the service, and he's saying, "You're altogether lovely." He's prophesying out of Song of Solomon. I'm going, I'm a guy. He's a guy. God's a guy. What do you mean you're altogether lovely? I've never quite related as like I'm supposed to. And I'm saying, God, is that really a word from you? I get in the car. We're driving on the freeway. Right from there, a big old white Cadillac pulls around, pulls in front, and the license plate says lovely. I mean, you can't, there is no way that was some bizarre coincidence. That was an orchestrated event from God. Either he, a couple hours ago, or ordained this guy's time to be right there at the right time when I would ask that question, or he created the car and it wasn't real. But I mean, it was real. It's a car that pulled in front of us, but you know.
Well, and uniquely, this is good for people to understand as well, is that there are times where he changes up the way he speaks to you. And so like your normal way of, okay, you have your prayer time, you get in, whatever you have is your routine, whether it's a walk or you get on your knees in the morning, and he's just giving you a truth of the day. And it's like, wow. And then all of a sudden it's like, it's not there. You're doing the same thing. You used to get something all the time and it's not there. And you're like, whoa. And so it would often, even for this last 3 years, a lot of the most powerful communication from him to me has been through the horse races and through the sports events and the scriptures that are highlighted and the names that are highlighted and the players. And I'm like, oh my goodness, the messaging is so clear here. But it's like he wasn't telling me that in my normal way, but that's part of my normal way now. And so it's like he just like, are you paying attention? And I'll speak. And wherever you're like Moses, you're in the desert and there's bushes. I can get your attention. We can talk. And wherever you are, whatever you're doing, if he knows you're paying attention, you hunger for his voice, hunger for communication, he will find a way to communicate. It becomes your proof of royalty to discern how he's speaking. You know, that proverb scripture, king likes to hide things, but you prove your royalty as well when you go ahead and do the search and not just say, well, it's in the Bible. I need the plain scripture that says it. You're never going to find a plain scripture that tells you if you should quit your job, who you should marry, if this is the right church, should you take this trip? All these things come out of conversations on the side. So the idea that the scripture is the only way you're going to hear from God, you're going to miss out on 90% of the things you need.
And one of the takeaways with me is that not only are we meant to have fun ferreting out these codes, he's having a blast creating them. You know, it's his joy to conceal a matter and give you codes. And you know, it's like, hey, Gabe, watch this. I'm going to make this car pull in front of Steve and say lovely right when he's asking the question. You know, how he did. I mean, I'm still laughing about it years later. How did he do that? It
is. And that's what he wants us, like, in awe of his capabilities. That's why when I know that God, I'm like, and we're going to have some mediocre end where he's going to come and like, okay, I see y'all getting beat up and I'm sorry. I didn't know it was going to be so hard. I wanted you to be overcoming church. The gates of hell I guess the gates of hell did beat you up. So I'm going to have to rescue you. And you're like, I don't think so.